At twilight, the call came, not from a number, but from destiny itself. A trembling voice broke the distance. "I knew all along. I just couldn't say it." The words slid through static like confession through centuries. She wasn't confessing to crime, she was surrendering to truth. The rival of yesterday became the witness of today. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of pride dying peacefully. Forgiveness isn't spoken, it's transmitted. Somewhere in that call, heaven rerouted a prophecy. She was told to doubt you. They trained her heart to guard the old order, to protect the comfort of tradition from the fire of change. They said your visions were dangerous, your light too untamed to be trusted. But light has its own will. It leaks through walls, seeps through doctrine, and stains even the purest denial. Every time she tried to silence your name, it echoed louder inside her. Every time she spoke against you, her words trembled with hidden belief. She began to dream of you, not as rival, but as mirror. And in those dreams, she saw herself wearing your scars. She once believed the prophecy was a competition, a crown that could belong to only one. They whispered to her that destiny was a race, and she ran until her lungs became a battlefield. Every victory tasted like dust. Every applause sounded hollow, because the throne she fought for carried your name beneath its gold. She tried to wear your crown once, it burned her palms. The metal remembered its rightful frequency. Power does not lie, it hums in recognition of the soul it was forged for. And in that hum, she felt the pain of every false triumph, every borrowed light. She withdrew into silence. From the outside, she seemed strong, but inside, her spirit fractured into the same two words. Why him? Jealousy became her language, and pride her shelter. Yet even in that darkness, your patience haunted her, not as condemnation, but as invitation. You never fought her. You waited. You let time teach what your words could not. Then came the night when heaven intervened. A dream too vivid to ignore. She saw the sky split open, your figure standing where judgment should be, but instead you offered a hand. You said nothing. You only looked at her with eyes that knew every wound she had ever hidden. And in that gaze, something ancient in her began to melt. When she woke, she couldn't breathe. The air itself demanded honesty. For the first time, she realized the battle was never between you and her. It was between her fear and her calling. The kingdom had never divided you. Only misunderstanding did. She sat before the mirror and saw both of you inside the same reflection. Not enemies. Not competitors. Just fragments of one prophecy learning to remember its unity. And so she wrote, a letter trembling with light, inked in regret and recognition. He never fought me. He waited until I saw. That single line rewrote the story of your bloodline. What was rivalry became revelation. What was bitterness became bridge. Heaven took note. A new scroll was unsealed, Confession Protocol, 777, Restoration initiated. Because every time a heart admits truth, an entire lineage breathes again. Bloodlines reboot when confession meets compassion. And in that sacred exchange, both your names were rewritten into the same sentence. Chosen, not against each other, but for each other. From that night on, the air changed. The whispers of division began to fade. Even those who once took sides fell into silence, not of fear, but of awe. They sensed something divine had shifted, an ancient rivalry folding into grace. And the angels, stationed at the edge of heaven, recorded it with steady hands. Sibling Protocol 777, reunion achieved. Because mercy had done what blood alone could not. It remembered that family is not about who was right, it's about who was redeemed. The dawn that followed felt different. The light was gentler, as if heaven itself was careful not to startle what had just been reborn. When she opened her eyes, the room seemed to breathe with her, walls exhaling peace, floorboards humming in quiet agreement. Her confession had not erased the past, but it had changed its language. What used to accuse now testified. The same memories that once burned her began to warm her instead. You felt it too. Far away, in your own silence, something invisible loosened in your chest. The weight you had carried, the ache of being misunderstood, rejected, falsely seen as the threat, began to lift. You realized that her apology was never about words. It was the universe folding back toward equilibrium. A sacred symmetry restored. When you met again, there were no speeches. No rehearsed forgiveness. Only a quiet recognition, the kind that doesn't need vocabulary. She looked at you and finally saw what you had always seen. Two halves of the same vow, written before time learned to measure itself. You did not lecture. You listened. You let her tell her story the way truth deserves to be told. Trembling, unfinished, but sincere. And in that act, heaven wrote a new commandment. Forgiveness spoken softly becomes instruction loud enough for heaven. Others began to notice. The change was contagious. What started as one confession rippled through generations. Cousins, friends, old rivals, even nations. Truth spread like dawn, slow but unstoppable. They began to speak, to cry, to remember. Families divided by jealousy started sending messages at midnight. I don't know why we stopped talking. Neighbors who had built walls began planting gardens instead. Forgiveness had found its rhythm, and the world began to hum in key. Heaven called it the Celestial Parade. Angels documented it under Code 777, reunion achieved. No trumpets, no grand ceremony, just the quiet march of human hearts aligning again. It was the kind of miracle that hides inside everyday gestures, a shared glance, a hand held too long, an argument that dissolves before it begins. And even the earth responded. Storms softened, birds returned early, time itself seemed merciful. For the first time in years, she laughed. And when you heard it, you didn't flinch, you smiled. Because the sound no longer carried rivalry. It carried harmony. That laughter became a hymn, proof that redemption can be melodic. Where competition once lived, collaboration began to bloom. Where pride had drawn lines, love built bridges. You didn't need to say, I forgive you. You already had. The act of standing there, unarmed, was forgiveness incarnate. And she, now humbled, became your ally, the sister archetype restored, the shadow made sacred. Together you stood under a sky washed clean, knowing that the prophecy had always required two witnesses to be complete. And heaven whispered its verdict, rivalry resolved, lineage restored. From that day, your names were no longer written in opposition. They were recorded as one, unified frequency, dual purpose, single mission, to prove that love wins twice. The days that followed carried a strange peace, not the silence of absence, but the quiet after a storm that finally spent itself. Everywhere you went, the air seemed lighter. Faces that once turned away now greeted you with cautious wonder, as if they could sense something unearthly hovering just beyond your shadow. You were no longer the outcast prophet or the misunderstood heir. You were evidence, living proof that hearts can be rewritten. She walked beside you again, not behind you, not ahead of you, beside. The rhythm of your steps sounded like a promise renewed. And as you both crossed the threshold of what was once a battlefield, the earth beneath your feet seemed to sigh in relief. Old echoes of argument faded, even the ghosts of your lineage bowed in respect. Because when one soul confesses and another forgives, the entire ancestry exhales. At night, she still dreamt of the old days, the shouting, the envy, the endless need to prove herself. But now, when she woke, those memories didn't haunt her, they humbled her. They became lessons written in fire, chapters redeemed by grace. She often whispered under her breath, "He never fought me. He waited." Each time, the phrase carried new meaning, less regret, more gratitude. And heaven responded to that whisper. The record of wrongs began to erase itself. Not by denial, but by transformation. Because divine justice doesn't punish, it purifies. Your story, once a wound, became a sermon. People began retelling it without knowing your names, only your essence. Two souls, divided by pride, reunited by revelation. Soon, word spread, not through gossip, but through resonance. Strangers felt compelled to make peace with those they resented. Mothers called estranged sons. Brothers sent letters long delayed. Whole communities rediscovered tenderness. The confession of one woman became a global frequency of restoration. You started to notice signs, feathers in places they shouldn't be, numbers repeating on clocks, music stopping right before your favorite line. Small confirmations that heaven was listening. You realized that this was never just your story. It was a pattern encoded in creation itself. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was architecture. The structure that keeps reality from collapsing under the weight of human pride. And the angels, the same ones who recorded your rivalry, now documented your renewal. They wrote with light instead of ink. Across celestial screens, the message shimmered, sibling protocol, 777, full restoration achieved. And beneath that, a single line glowed like scripture reborn, love reclaims what envy abandons. You stood beneath a new sky. The constellations seemed rearranged, as if the universe itself had shifted to celebrate your peace. You felt the presence of ancestors who had long carried the burden of conflict watching from beyond the veil. In the weeks that followed, the world seemed to realign itself around you. The same streets that once felt narrow began to widen. The same eyes that once judged began to soften. You could feel the pulse of renewal in ordinary things. In a morning breeze, in a stranger's nod, in the rhythm of your own breathing. Peace had become contagious. Even those who hadn't heard your story sensed the vibration of something healed. You and she began working together again, but not as before. No more silent comparisons. No more invisible competitions. Instead, every idea she brought became an echo of yours, and every word you spoke carried her voice inside it. It was as if heaven had rewritten your communication in chords instead of sentences. What once divided you now composed symphonies. There was a day, the day of the covenant, as angels called it, when both of you stood before the old altar of your ancestors. The same stones where generations had fought, wept, cursed, and begged for favor. You laid your hands on the cold surface, and the rock itself began to warm. The altar recognized peace. A wind swept through the ruins, lifting dust like incense. And a whisper rose from the unseen realm. The line is clean again. She turned to you, tears not of sorrow but of recognition. Her voice broke softly. I understand now, it was never about being chosen instead of you. It was about being chosen with you. And in that confession, the final fracture healed. The lineage, long divided, fused into one pulse. Heaven recorded it as Reconciliation Code 144, lineage restored in dual light. From that moment, your destiny accelerated. Doors that had remained locked for years now opened in sequence, like a code finally entered correctly. Each step forward felt guided, preordained. Resources appeared, allies arrived, wisdom unfolded from within you. It was as though the universe had been waiting for your unity to resume its rhythm. And she, the sister archetype, once the symbol of envy, became the guardian of your peace. Wherever you went, she went too, not as shadow, but as shield. Her laughter returned to you like a promise fulfilled. When she spoke your name, it carried no resistance, only reverence. You both knew the old world had ended, and something purer had begun. Together you founded the Fellowship, a circle not of hierarchy, but of harmony. Its first law was simple: where competition ends, revelation begins. People gathered from every direction: broken siblings, estranged lovers, forgotten friends. All of them drawn by the magnetic call of reconciliation. Each told a story, and in every story, a familiar pattern: rivalry giving way to recognition. The movement spread like wildfire through hearts that had forgotten how to forgive. And as you spoke to them, you realized something profound: redemption isn't an event, it's an inheritance. Every time one heart forgives, the entire human fabric strengthens. You began to teach that truth, not with sermons, but with silence, with presence, with a peace that now lived behind your eyes. Even heaven listened. The Fellowship grew beyond anything you imagined. It started as a gathering in a single hall, candles, prayers, a few voices trembling with hope, but soon became a living current, a wave of remembrance moving across nations. You didn't plan it. It unfolded on its own, as if the story had chosen to keep writing itself. Everywhere you looked, you saw the pattern repeating: siblings forgiving, enemies shaking hands, lovers reuniting after decades apart. Each reconciliation sent a sound into the unseen, a tone only heaven could hear. And with every tone, creation healed another fracture in its design. You and she stood often at the edge of cities, watching lights flicker in the distance. No more rivalry, no more debt between you. Just two carriers of the same prophecy, watching it bloom. Sometimes she would smile and say, "Do you ever think they'll understand what we really did?" You would answer softly, "They don't have to. It's enough that they feel it." Then came the night of the celestial announcement. The sky was unusually clear, stars burning brighter than memory. At midnight, the air shimmered, not with noise, but with knowledge. A message appeared across the firmament, visible only to those who had confessed and forgiven. Rivalry resolved, lineage restored. The angels called it the restoration broadcast. People awoke from dreams they couldn't explain, hearts racing, eyes wet. They didn't know your names, yet they whispered thank you into the air. The months turned like quiet pages in a book that finally knew its ending. You both kept walking the path, not as prophets chasing glory, but as keepers of balance. Wherever you went, people felt it before they saw it. The temperature changed, the noise softened, and hearts remembered what peace sounded like. It wasn't a miracle that shouted, it was one that breathed. The fellowship grew. Letters arrived from distant lands, testimonies written by those who had heard the story and dared to forgive their own. Some spoke of fathers returning after decades, some of nations choosing dialogue instead of war. Each act of mercy echoed the original confession, rippling outward in frequencies invisible but undeniable. Heaven called it the renewal wave. You and she often sat in silence, watching sunsets turn cities gold. No words were needed. Redemption had replaced conversation. She sometimes smiled at you and whispered, "We were the storm that learned how to heal." And you would nod because it was true. Destruction had taught you reconstruction. Every scar on your hands had become a scripture of endurance. Then came the night of the great alignment. The stars seemed closer, larger, as if drawn toward the earth. In dreams, you both saw the same vision, a book made of light opening above you. Its pages carried the stories of every sibling, every lineage, every soul that had chosen reconciliation over revenge. And at the end of the book, your names appeared, intertwined, no longer separated by lines, but joined by flame. The voice of the source spoke only one sentence: "My kindness shall not depart from you." When you awoke, the air shimmered. Everything familiar looked new, walls breathing, time itself slower. You understood that the prophecy had completed its circle. Years later, the legend of that reconciliation became a language of its own. Children grew up hearing your story not as myth, but as instruction. They learned that power was not in conquest, but in communion, that truth was not proven by victory, but by vulnerability. Every time a heart softened somewhere in the world, a new note joined the quiet song that had begun the night she confessed. It was as though the atmosphere itself remembered you. The fellowship of restoration transformed into something greater, no longer a circle, but a current. It flowed through cities, through families, through systems once thought irredeemable. Judges quoted your words, leaders prayed your silence, artists painted your reunion in colors no one had ever mixed before. Every creation bore the mark of reconciliation. The sound of conflict began to fade from the planet's rhythm. She, once the symbol of envy, became the voice of equilibrium. Her speeches were never grand. She simply told the truth plainly, and the truth itself did the work. She said, "I once fought love because I feared it would expose me. But love didn't expose me, it educated me." People wept, not for her shame, but for the reflection they saw in her courage. You remained the quiet presence beside her. Not a leader anymore, but a living archive of forgiveness. When people came to you for miracles, you simply told them, the miracle already happened when you stopped resisting peace. Your words carried weight not because they were loud, but because they came from the same silence that healed you both. The era that followed your passing was known as the Age of Remembrance. No one could trace when it officially began. Some said it started the moment the first stranger forgave another without knowing why. What mattered was the transformation. Empires loosened their borders, cities learned to listen, and the word enemy slowly vanished from every tongue. Monuments were not built for you. Instead, gardens were planted, living altars of peace. In each one grew twin trees whose roots intertwined underground, symbolizing the reconciliation that had once rewritten heaven's scroll. Children played beneath their branches, learning stories that began not with war, but with understanding. The Fellowship of Restoration became a global lineage of healers. They carried no banners, only presence. Wherever conflict rose, one of them would appear, a calm figure who spoke few words, yet whose silence dissolved hatred like salt in water. They carried within them the resonance of your original forgiveness, a frequency that needed no translation. Scripture evolved. Old texts began to glow with new meaning. Verses once read as judgment now breathed compassion. People realized that prophecy was never about predicting doom, it was about remembering destiny. And in that remembrance, your legacy lived not as doctrine, but as dialogue. Centuries passed. Civilizations shifted, languages died, stars moved. But somewhere in every generation, two souls would find each other and repeat your story. Rivals at first, then mirrors, then kin. Each time, the confession would return in a different form. I knew all along. I just couldn't say it. And each time, heaven would whisper the same reply. You're forgiven, now finish the circle. And long after words themselves faded from human use, when thought and emotion merged into one current of light, the memory of your story still moved like a current beneath consciousness. It was not taught, it was felt. Every being born in that age carried within them a trace of your final vibration, the harmony of reconciliation. It hummed in their bones like a hidden prayer. The universe had built itself around your peace. In that far future, humanity no longer spoke of gods or prophecies. They spoke of balance. They lived in luminous cities that hovered above oceans reborn from centuries of healing. There were no nations, only networks of resonance, clusters of souls sharing intention. When they looked at the stars, they no longer searched for power, only for kinship. Each constellation represented a principle: truth, mercy, patience, renewal. But at the center of the sky burned a twin star system, eternal reminder of the day two hearts reconciled and the cosmos rewrote its rhythm.